The maid whispered, "You'll regret choosing me." The Duke smiled. "I already regret waiting this long." Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. And trust me, you won't want to miss tomorrow's story. So stay tuned. The deep chime of the grandfather clock echoed through the cavernous halls of Ashford House, its rhythmic toll announcing the hour. 11 o'clock. Tomorrow would be a day of grandeur, the Duke of Ashford's long-anticipated engagement ball, and the house was a hive of activity. Servants scurried, their footsteps muted against the thick Persian rugs, their faces reflecting a blend of excitement and apprehension. The household staff, like clockwork, prepared the ballroom, while the kitchen hummed with the clatter of pots and the scent of delicacies being prepared for the evening. In the servants' quarters, Eleanor Thorne stood over Lady Victoria Pemberton's gown, her slender fingers deftly guiding the iron across the rich fabric, pressing out the creases with practiced precision. Her gaze remained fixed on the delicate material in her hands, the quietness of the task masking the turbulence of her thoughts. As the steam rose from the iron, it filled the small, dimly lit room, and for a moment, Eleanor allowed herself to breathe in the scent of clean linen and lavender that clung to the fabric. 3 years. 3 years of this silently moving through Ashford House, invisible to everyone but the servants. She had perfected her role as the dutiful maid, her life a careful dance of keeping her head down and her presence unnoticed. She had learned how to exist without being seen, how to serve without being remembered, how to love without hope. She placed the gown on the bed with the same care she would a fragile thing, though her heart felt far from fragile. Her love for Sebastian Sinclair, the Duke of Ashford, had been cultivated in the quiet, stolen moments she spent watching him from afar, the brief glances they shared in passing, the way he would sometimes nod at her during breakfast or acknowledge her with a smile. But each of those moments was fleeting, easily forgotten by him, and a constant reminder to her of a love that could never be. Her fingers absent-mindedly brushed against the locket hidden beneath her servant's dress, the small piece of jewelry she had worn since her mother's death. A tiny portrait of Charity Ashworth, her mother, was nestled inside, a reminder of the life she had once known. A life of privilege, a life of promise, before everything had come crashing down. Her father, Sir Thomas Thorne, had been accused of embezzling funds from a partnership with Lord Pemberton, Lady Victoria's father, and the scandal had shattered their lives. The Thorne estate was seized, their family name tarnished, and Eleanor had been reduced to this, a maid in the house of the man she loved. Eleanor's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. It was Margaret, Lady Victoria's personal maid, her face pale with panic. "Miss Thorne," she said, breathless, "you need to come quickly. Lady Victoria, she's gone. The room's empty, the window's open, and there's a ladder. What do we do?" Eleanor's heart skipped. She knew immediately what had happened. Lady Victoria had left. She had eloped. No, it can't be," Eleanor whispered, her mind spinning. Her gaze fell to the vanity where Lady Victoria's engagement ring, nestled in its velvet box, lay beside a letter addressed to His Grace, the Duke of Ashford. "Eleanor, what do we do?" Margaret's voice trembled with fear. Eleanor's stomach twisted in knots, but she knew what had to be done. She had to deliver the letter. She had to do it herself, privately, before the whole house was aware of the scandal, before it consumed them all. She took a deep breath, forcing the weight of her emotions to settle into the pit of her stomach, and nodded. "I'll go to His Grace immediately. You stay here, don't speak of this to anyone." As Eleanor walked through the darkened halls of Ashford House, the weight of the night pressed down upon her. The grand portraits of the Sinclair ancestors seemed to watch her every step, their painted eyes following her as she passed. The thick carpets muffled her footsteps, and the silence around her was oppressive, as if the entire house was holding its breath. She moved past the rooms where Sebastian's wealth and heritage were on full display, the library, with its towering shelves of leather-bound books, the grand dining room, where delicate crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, the study, where she knew he was working late, sorting through endless papers of estate business. Each step toward his study felt like a betrayal, and yet there was a part of her that couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief that Lady Victoria was gone, that this charade had ended. Was she relieved for herself, or for Sebastian? Eleanor couldn't decide. For 3 years, she had observed him from the periphery of his life. She had watched him in the library, where he would read by the firelight, his face a mask of concentration. She had seen him in the garden, walking alone, his thoughts as distant as the horizon. She had even exchanged a few words with him during breakfast, polite but formal. She had lived in his world without ever truly belonging to it. And yet, when she heard of Lady Victoria's departure, she couldn't ignore the faint glimmer of hope that flickered within her chest. As she reached his study, she saw the light beneath the door. She paused, her breath catching in her throat. She could hear him moving inside, the rustle of papers, the quiet murmur of his voice as he muttered to himself, lost in the work that had consumed him for so long. Eleanor raised her trembling hand to knock, but before she could, the door swung open. Sebastian stood before her, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his face tired but still handsome in the dim light of the study. He looked surprised to see her, but his surprise quickly turned to concern. "Miss Thorne, it's nearly midnight. Is something wrong?" His voice was steady, but there was a hint of weariness beneath it. Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Your Grace, I regret to inform you." Her voice broke slightly as she extended the velvet box with the ring and the letter. Sebastian's expression shifted from confusion to realization as he took the letter from her, his eyes scanning the words written by Lady Victoria. Eleanor stood there, holding her breath, waiting for his reaction. The silence in the room stretched, suffocating. She waited for him to explode in anger, for him to slam his fist on the desk and curse the woman who had betrayed him. She waited for his devastation, but instead, Sebastian looked up at her with an expression she had never seen before. His eyes were intense, hungry, desperate, and his voice, when he spoke, was soft, almost relieved. "Thank God." Eleanor's heart stopped. "Your Grace?" He rose from his desk, circling around it, his gaze never leaving her. He moved toward her with deliberate steps, his presence filling the room, overwhelming her. "Thank God she's gone. Thank God I'm free of that charade," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor took a step back, her mind reeling. "I don't understand." Sebastian stopped just before her, his breath warm against her face. His voice dropped to a whisper, filled with raw honesty. "Don't you? After 3 years, Eleanor, don't you know? I've been trying to forget you since the moment you entered this house. I cannot do it anymore." Her world tilted. The letter and ring box slipped from her nerveless fingers, falling to the floor with a soft thud. She stared up at him, her chest tight, her mind in a haze. "No, you cannot mean," she whispered, her voice breaking. And in that moment, Eleanor realized that everything she had guarded for so long, the love she had buried deep inside her, the hopeless longing, the pain had been mirrored in him all along. The silence between them hung heavy, pregnant with everything that had been said and left unsaid. The silence that followed Sebastian's confession clung to the room like smoke from a fire, thick and suffocating. Eleanor stood motionless, her breath shallow and her mind whirling, trying to process the flood of emotions that had crashed into her. The Duke, the man she had served in silence for so long, had just admitted that he loved her. It felt like a dream, one she had buried deep in her heart, never daring to hope it might become reality. Her heart raced as she took a cautious step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the edge of the doorframe. Her throat was tight, her voice caught in the web of disbelief and confusion. I can't believe it," she whispered, her words trembling. "You can't mean it. I'm just a maid, Sebastian. I'm nothing. I am not worthy of your love." Sebastian's eyes softened, and for a moment it seemed as though the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. His posture remained relaxed, though there was a raw vulnerability in the way he looked at her, an honesty she hadn't expected. "Eleanor," he said gently, stepping closer, "I knew who you were the moment you entered this house. I knew you were Sir Thomas Thorne's daughter. I knew the truth about your family." Eleanor blinked in shock. "What do you mean? How could you have known?" Sebastian sighed, his gaze never leaving hers. He walked over to the desk and picked up a leather-bound folder, one he had been absent-mindedly flipping through earlier. He opened it, revealing documents, witness statements, and financial records. The weight of those papers in his hands seemed heavier than any physical object he had ever held. "I knew your father," he began, his voice low, as if the words themselves were painful to say. "I was just a young man, 24 years old, when Sir Thomas was ruined. I had heard the rumors, the accusations of embezzlement, but I always doubted them. I was friends with your father, Eleanor. I believed in his integrity. A flash of memories appeared before Eleanor's eyes, the image of her father, once proud and strong, now reduced to a shadow of himself. The pain of his fall from grace, the way his reputation had been destroyed, the way it had crushed everything she had ever known. "Then why did you give me the position?" Eleanor's voice cracked with emotion, her mind unable to comprehend the depth of Sebastian's confession. "Why hire me and make me serve Lady Victoria? Why put me through this hell these past 3 months? To watch you with her, to watch you marry her?" She choked on the last word, tears filling her eyes. Sebastian stepped toward her again, his face etched with anguish. "It wasn't about charity, Eleanor. It wasn't about guilt or pity. I wanted you near me. From the very moment you applied for the position, I wanted you in this house. But I told myself it was for the right reasons. I thought I could help, that I could provide for you and your family after what happened. I never thought that I was making the biggest mistake of my life by keeping my distance." Eleanor could feel the walls around her heart begin to crumble. Sebastian's words were like a balm to the wound she had carried for years, but they also made the wound ache with a painful intensity. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why didn't you just tell me? Why didn't you just—" She stopped, her throat tight with emotion. "Because I couldn't," he confessed, his voice strained. "I thought I could move on. I thought I could marry Lady Victoria, do the right thing by my title and my family, and forget about you. But every moment I spent with her, every moment I spent in her presence, I was thinking of you. I was watching you from the corner of my eye, wondering what it would be like to love you, to be with you." Eleanor's breath hitched. "Then why Lady Victoria? Why marry her?" Sebastian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Duty, society, my grandmother. She is a woman of noble birth, an appropriate match for me, and I thought I could settle for that. I thought I could do what was expected, but every time I looked at her, I saw nothing but a woman I couldn't love. I saw her as a duty, not as a person I wanted to spend my life with." Eleanor took a shaky breath, her thoughts swirling. "You're telling me this now, Sebastian? After everything? After I've been serving her and watching you with her, watching you prepare for your engagement? After all the pain and humiliation? You expect me to believe this?" Sebastian's voice dropped to a whisper. "I know what I've put you through, Eleanor, and I am sorry. I can't undo the past, but I can change the future. I've loved you for so long, and I can't pretend anymore." Eleanor closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing against her like a storm threatening to break. "I'm nothing, Sebastian. I'm a maid. I have nothing but this life, this position, and you're asking me to leave it all behind. You're asking me to ruin everything." He shook his head. "You're wrong, Eleanor. You are not just a maid. You're a woman of incredible strength, intelligence, and grace. You've spent years in the shadows, serving others, and never once have you allowed yourself to be seen for the incredible person you are. But I see you. I've always seen you, and I want to spend my life with you, not because of duty, but because I love you." Eleanor's heart ached as she listened to him, the truth of his words breaking through the walls she had built around herself. But despite the love she felt for him, there were still so many barriers in her mind, so many reasons why they could never be. "You'll regret this," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You'll regret choosing me. I'm not the woman you think I am. I don't belong in your world." Sebastian's face softened, and he stepped closer, his eyes filled with quiet intensity. "I already regret waiting this long. I've spent 3 years pretending I didn't see you, pretending I didn't want you. But I can't do it anymore. I can't live without you, Eleanor." His words shattered the final defense she had left, and before she could stop herself, she found her lips trembling, her hand reaching out toward him. "Tell me to stop," Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. "Tell me this is madness, and I'll let you go. But if there's any part of you that wants this, that wants me—" Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, the raw vulnerability in his eyes making her pulse quicken. "I do," she whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. "God help me, I do." In that moment, every ounce of her resistance crumbled, and she found herself moving toward him, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was as desperate as it was passionate. 3 years of longing, of love unspoken, of silent suffering, were finally released in that moment. The kiss deepened, Sebastian's hands holding her with a fervor that matched the depth of his feelings. Eleanor responded in kind, her hands reaching up to cup his face, pulling him closer. The firelight flickered around them, casting dancing shadows on the walls as the world outside faded away. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathless and trembling, Sebastian leaned his forehead against hers. His voice was hushed, almost reverent. "Yes?" Eleanor, still reeling from the intensity of the kiss, nodded. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you, whatever the cost." Sebastian's face broke into a wide, genuine smile, the joy in his eyes like a beacon. "Tomorrow was to be my engagement ball. It still will be, but to you, Eleanor. To the woman I choose, not the one society chose for me." Eleanor felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. "They'll destroy us both." Sebastian's smile softened, but there was a fierce protection in his eyes. "Let them try. I'm the Duke of Ashford. I bow to no one." The distant sound of the grandfather clock struck midnight, and as the chimes rang through the study, Sebastian whispered, "It's tomorrow now, the day everything changes." Eleanor stood there, her hand clasped tightly in his, feeling a mix of terror and hope. The world outside might never accept their love, but here, in this moment, with Sebastian by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Together, the first light of dawn crept through the narrow gap in the curtains, casting a faint golden glow over Eleanor's modest room. It was a stark contrast to the night before, the soft warmth of the morning, illuminating a space that had felt like a prison, yet the events of the past hours had shattered every semblance of normalcy. Eleanor lay awake in her small bed, her body stiff beneath the covers, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't slept at all, her mind trapped in a never-ending loop of memories, each one flashing by like an uninvited guest. Sebastian's confession, his kiss, the love she had denied herself for so long, now suddenly real. His words echoed in her head, over and over. "I've been trying to forget you since the moment you entered this house. I cannot do it anymore." Her heart, so tightly bound for years, had finally unfurled in that one desperate, heart-pounding kiss. But now, as the day crept in, so did the weight of her decision. What had she done? She had accepted the Duke of Ashford's proposal, a proposal that would defy every social norm, every expectation placed upon them both. Her world, her carefully constructed identity as a humble servant, had been thrown into chaos by one single moment of weakness. What scandal would she unleash? Her mind drifted to the consequences of her actions, the whispers, the judgment, the inevitable backlash. She could already feel the eyes of society burning through her, through every room in Ashford House, through every word that would be spoken in the coming days. Her father's memory, a man condemned by society for crimes he never committed, loomed large in her thoughts. Would he be proud of her, or would he turn in his grave, ashamed of his daughter's choice to marry a duke, to be tied to a man of such standing? Eleanor gripped the edge of the blanket, her nails pressing into the fabric, as if trying to ground herself in some form of reality. She owned nothing but her servants' dresses, no dowry, no family to support her, no standing in society. The notion of becoming the wife of the Duke of Ashford seemed both impossible and absurd. It was a dream, a fairy tale, and she was merely a spectator in it. But as much as her mind sought to deny it, the reality was undeniable. She had accepted his love, and now there was no going back. Suddenly, the quiet morning was broken by a knock at the door, followed by the familiar voice of Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper. "Miss Thorne," she called, her voice urgent but muffled through the door. "Lady Victoria's absence has been discovered. His Grace has been informed." Eleanor's heart lurched. The shock of the previous night was still fresh in her veins, but now the chaos of the household had begun. The servants would whisper. The gossip would spread like wildfire, and it would be impossible to keep the secret of what had transpired last night from reaching the ears of those who mattered most. "Come in," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse from the weight of her thoughts. The door opened, and Mrs. Davies stepped inside, her face drawn with worry. "Miss Thorne," she repeated, her hands wringing together. "The household is in chaos. Lady Victoria has disappeared." Mr. Thornton found the letter and informed His Grace. "There's talk of a scandal. The ball. It will be cancelled. What will happen to us now?" Eleanor rose from the bed, her movements stiff and slow. "What will happen?" she murmured to herself, half in disbelief. She glanced down at the engagement ring that had fallen to the floor beside her, still lying there from the night before, and felt the weight of it settle in her chest. "The Duke," Mrs. Davies pressed. "He asked for you, Miss Thorne. His Grace has requested your presence in the morning room. Eleanor's stomach twisted. The thought of facing Sebastian again, so soon after the intensity of the previous night, filled her with dread. She had expected the world to crumble around her, but she hadn't anticipated this moment, the moment when she would have to confront the consequences of her choice. What had she truly agreed to? The morning room, Eleanor repeated, though the words tasted foreign in her mouth. Mrs. Davies seemed to sense her hesitation. He's waiting for you, Miss Thorne. His Grace. He's not angry. But there's something more. Something I'm not sure you'll want to hear. The mention of his name stirred something deep inside Eleanor. She could not stop herself from thinking of the desperate confession he had made, of the way his lips had touched hers, as if time and duty had fallen away between them. But now, with the light of day shining on her, everything felt different. She gave Mrs. Davies a faint nod, her heart heavy with uncertainty. "I will go," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The corridors of Ashford House were still and quiet in the early morning light, the echoes of her footsteps muffled by the thick carpets that lined the floor. As she walked toward the morning room, Eleanor's mind raced. The house that had once seemed so majestic now felt oppressive, its grandeur a reminder of the life that would never be hers. The portraits of Sebastian's ancestors, all stern faces in dark, gilded frames, watched her as she passed. Her eyes flickered toward them, but she quickly looked away, as if she might betray something with a single glance. The door to the morning room loomed ahead, and Eleanor's nerves began to fray. She had no idea what she was walking into, no idea what Sebastian expected from her now. She had wanted him, yes, she had kissed him, and the world had felt both right and wrong in that instant. But now, the reality was more complicated than she could have ever imagined. She reached for the door handle, but just as her fingers brushed it, the door opened before her. Sebastian stood in the doorway, his face weary, yet somehow soft with concern. But behind him, there was someone else, a woman of impressive stature, wearing a rich, dark gown, her silver hair neatly pulled back into a tight bun. The Dowager Duchess Marianne Sinclair, Sebastian's formidable grandmother. Eleanor froze, her hand still on the doorframe, the Dowager's sharp, assessing gaze fixed on her immediately, and Eleanor felt an unexpected wave of discomfort, as if she had been caught in an act of transgression. But the Dowager's expression didn't reflect disapproval. Instead, it seemed almost knowing. "So this is Miss Thorne," the Dowager said, her voice smooth and deliberate. "I wondered when Sebastian would finally admit the truth." Eleanor's heart skipped in her chest. The truth? What truth? Sebastian stepped aside, motioning for Eleanor to enter. His voice was careful, though there was an underlying tension in his words. "Eleanor, I'd like you to meet my grandmother, the Dowager Duchess Marianne Sinclair." Eleanor gave a curtsy, instinctively lowering her eyes. "Your Grace," she said, her voice uncertain. The Dowager's sharp eyes seemed to take in every detail, Eleanor's posture, the way she held herself, the faint remnants of last night's chaos still visible in her disheveled appearance. There was no malice in the older woman's gaze, just a quiet, knowing curiosity. Sebastian's voice interrupted Eleanor's thoughts. "I confessed everything to her this morning. She knows about you, about your family. I told her everything, Eleanor." Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. "You told her?" Sebastian nodded, a flicker of regret passing through his eyes. "I couldn't keep it from her any longer. I needed her counsel." However, the Dowager's expression softened. "I knew your mother, Eleanor. Charity Ashworth was my dearest friend before she married your father. I attended their wedding." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You knew my mother?" she repeated, as if hearing it would somehow make it real. She had spent her life thinking of her mother as a distant memory, a woman lost to scandal and the cruelty of fate. To hear the Dowager speak of her in such personal terms shook her to her core. The Dowager continued, her voice tinged with sadness. "I lost touch with her after she married. When I heard of her death and the scandal surrounding your father, I believed the worst. Society's whispers convinced me that Thomas Thorne had been guilty, but I should have known better. I should have helped. I should have investigated." She paused, looking down, as if weighed by the years of guilt. "Instead, I let them convince me of your father's guilt, and I failed Charity." Eleanor felt a deep pang of sorrow, both for her mother and for herself. "But you believe me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Dowager looked her in the eye, her voice strong. "Of course I do. And if Sebastian loves you as I can see that he does, then you have my full support." Eleanor felt the weight of the dowager's words settle on her. It was an offer of acceptance, but also of responsibility. Sebastian stepped forward, his hand resting gently on Eleanor's shoulder. "Tonight, the engagement ball will proceed, but with a different bride." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Tonight? So soon? Shouldn't we wait? Let the scandal settle?" The dowager shook her head, her lips curling into a wry smile. "No, we strike while society is already reeling. One scandal will overshadow the other. And besides," she added with a glint in her eye, "hesitation suggests shame. We have nothing to be ashamed of." Sebastian's gaze was firm as he met Eleanor's eyes. "Tonight, I will claim you as mine. Before all of London society, I will stand beside you and show them the truth." Eleanor's heart raced. "But I have nothing to wear, nothing appropriate." The dowager raised her hand. "Leave that to me." The rest of the morning passed in a blur. With the dowager's assistance, Eleanor was fitted for a gown that seemed too grand, too beautiful, for someone like her. The midnight blue silk shimmered as it was tailored to fit her slender frame, the delicate silver embroidery catching the light with every movement. The dowager placed the duchess's sapphires around her neck, the jewels cool against her skin. Eleanor looked at her reflection in the mirror, the woman staring back at her both familiar and foreign. She saw the woman. She could have been the woman who never fell from grace, the woman who never became a maid. But then the thought struck her, she was not just that woman. She was someone else entirely now. Tears welled in her eyes. "I look like my mother," she whispered. The dowager's voice softened. "Charity would be proud. You are her daughter, Eleanor. Don't forget that." As the evening drew nearer, Eleanor stood by the window, looking out over the grounds of Ashford House, her heart a tumultuous mess of fear and resolve. The night ahead would change everything. Would they truly be able to stand against the world? Sebastian appeared in the doorway, his breath catching in his throat as he saw her. "You're magnificent," he whispered. Eleanor turned toward him, unsure whether she was ready for what was about to happen. But when he extended his arm, offering it to her, she took a steadying breath and replied, "No, but I'll do it anyway." The grand ballroom of Ashford House was bathed in a sea of candlelight, the shimmering glow bouncing off gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers, casting a warm golden light over the assembled guests. The orchestra's strings hummed softly in the background as the most eligible of London's elite gathered in anticipation of what was meant to be the event of the season, the Duke of Ashford's engagement ball. But the air, thick with opulence, was also heavy with whispers, as the absence of Lady Victoria Pemberton, the supposed bride-to-be, cast an uncomfortable pall over the proceedings. Guests murmured among themselves, their voices carrying the weight of a scandal not yet revealed. It wasn't just that Lady Victoria had failed to appear, it was the shock of her disappearance, of the sudden, unfathomable choice she had made. The rumors that Lady Victoria had eloped with Captain Hartley from the cavalry were spreading like wildfire, and the speculation grew more rampant with every passing moment. Would the Duke cancel the ball? Would he appear at all? How could such a public humiliation be faced? Some guests already seemed to have abandoned hope, sneaking away in haste, eager to avoid the disgrace of the evening. Lord and Lady Pemberton, it was whispered, had fled to their country estate to avoid the disgrace, but they had left behind the whispers of their involvement in the mess. The only certainty was that Ashford House, normally a bastion of dignity and wealth, was now a stage for an unexpected tragedy. The orchestra played on, oblivious to the mounting tension in the room. Champagne flutes clinked, delicate porcelain dishes filled with treats were passed from hand to hand, and laughter, forced, nervously polite, rippled through the crowd. But it all felt hollow, empty, and then, as the night dragged on, the Duke made his entrance. Sebastian appeared at the top of the grand staircase, his tall figure commanding immediate attention. He was alone, and the sudden hush that fell over the room seemed to echo across the walls. The murmurs stopped, the gossip cut short, and every gaze was fixed on him. Dressed in his formal evening attire, Sebastian seemed a figure of regal restraint, his dark hair slightly mussed from a long day, his sharp jawline set in a mask of cold propriety. But even as he stood there, a figure of quiet authority, something about him felt different tonight. The Duke was no longer just a man who was used to getting his way. Tonight, he was a man who had been broken by the forces of fate and duty, yet was standing defiant in the face of those forces. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, but there was a slight crack to it, an emotional weight that none of the guests expected. "My lords and ladies," Sebastian began, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Thank you for attending what was to be my engagement celebration." A quiet murmur ran through the room, some guests shifting nervously in their places, others trying to catch a glimpse of what would happen next. They were all expecting him to announce a postponement, to declare that, of course, Lady Victoria had fallen ill, or that the ball would be rescheduled for another day. A few even expected a public expression of anger, the kind of noble rage that one would expect after such a public humiliation. But Sebastian did neither. The silence deepened as Sebastian paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle on his guests. "And it remains so," he said, his voice unwavering as his gaze flicked over the gathered crowd. "Though not to the lady you expected." The silence that followed was deafening. Confusion rippled through the room as the guests exchanged puzzled glances. The announcement had been as unexpected as the elopement itself. Some of the more cynical minds among the crowd began to wonder, was this some sort of last-minute jest? Sebastian, with a calmness that defied the circumstances, gestured toward the stairs. "May I present my intended bride?" Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. She had been standing in the shadows, hidden from view, her breath shallow, her palms clammy. She had no idea that Sebastian would proceed with the ball, let alone make such a bold statement. The reality of what she was about to do, a truth that had only begun to settle in her mind after Sebastian's proposal the night before, hadn't truly hit her until this moment. The guests stared, transfixed, as Eleanor stepped into view. Her midnight blue gown, rich and heavy, with silver embroidery that caught the candlelight, swirled around her as she moved, the soft rustle of fabric the only sound in the room. The dowager's sapphires sparkled at her throat, the cool gemstones resting heavily against her skin. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The recognition came slowly, but it did come. Murmurs erupted from the crowd. "Is that the maid?" someone whispered. "Lady Victoria's personal servant? Surely not." Eleanor's face flushed, and she felt the weight of every gaze in the room. The shock and disbelief were palpable. Her heart thundered in her chest, the anxiety nearly overwhelming. She had never in her life been so visible, so exposed. Every step she took felt like an eternity. The grand staircase seemed longer with each descending step, the eyes of the elite following her every move. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the scrutiny they placed upon her every gesture. Was she walking too slowly? Was she too fast? Was she too poised? Too vulnerable? Her legs trembled beneath her, but then she felt Sebastian's hand at the small of her back, steadying her. His touch was firm but gentle, grounding her in the storm of emotions swirling around her. "Don't let them see you're afraid," he whispered, his voice a balm against the growing panic inside her. Eleanor looked up at him, meeting his eyes. His gaze was steady, his jaw clenched as he looked down at her, but there was something else, something softer and more intimate in the way he held her. He wasn't ashamed, he wasn't backing down, and in that moment, Eleanor felt a surge of strength she didn't know she had. Together, they walked down the stairs, the murmur of the crowd intensifying as they moved closer to the floor. The whispers became louder, more insistent. Sebastian's voice rang out again, cutting through the rising noise. "My lords and ladies, may I present Miss Eleanor Thorne, daughter of the late Sir Thomas Thorne, and my intended bride." The room erupted in shocked gasps. Some were incredulous, others outright hostile, while a few whispered in confused admiration. "Lady Ashworth, ever the gossip," was the loudest voice in the crowd. "Surely this is some jest, Your Grace," she cried. "The woman is a servant." Sebastian turned to her, his expression icy. "Miss Thorne is a gentleman's daughter, reduced to servitude by circumstances beyond her control, circumstances I intend to remedy." There was a sudden, sharp intake of breath as the shock rippled through the room. No one had expected such a defense of a maid, and certainly not from the Duke of Ashford. Before the murmurs could settle, Lord Pemberton, Lady Victoria's father, stepped forward, his face red with anger. His voice was thick with indignation as he confronted Sebastian. "This is madness, Ashford," he sneered. "The woman's father was a thief and a coward who took his own life rather than face justice." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The accusation was a direct strike at her father, a wound she had spent years trying to heal. She felt the sting of it deep in her chest, the bitterness of the past threatening to suffocate her. Sebastian, however, remained calm, his voice a low growl as he stepped closer to Lord Pemberton. "Careful, Pemberton. You're on dangerous ground." Pemberton sneered again, his face twisted with disdain. "What will you do, Ashford? Ruin yourself over a servant girl? Society will never accept this match." Eleanor's hands trembled at her sides, but Sebastian's words were clear, his voice unwavering. "Then let them. I've chosen Eleanor. I stand by my choice, no matter what they think." The Dowager Duchess stepped forward, her voice commanding the attention of the room. "Eleanor Thorne is the daughter of my dearest friend, Charity Ashworth. I have known her family for decades." The revelation sent a ripple through the ballroom. The Dowager was not one to be trifled with, and her endorsement carried weight. "Any who question Miss Thorne's character or breeding will answer to me," she declared with sharp finality. The room seemed to shift as half the guests, unsure of what to believe, began to exit, their hasty departures a mixture of indignation and curiosity. Lord Pemberton, unable to tolerate the sight of the woman he had sought to destroy, stormed off in a fury, vowing retribution. But there was a new energy in the room now. Some guests remained, drawn by the spectacle of defiance. Among them was young Lady Charlotte Waverley, a known rebel in society, who approached Eleanor with a sly smile. "How wonderfully scandalous," she exclaimed. "You're the most interesting thing to happen to society in years." The music resumed, hesitantly at first, then swelling into a familiar waltz. Sebastian, without missing a beat, took Eleanor's hand and led her onto the dance floor, ignoring the remaining whispers. "You're doing beautifully," he whispered in her ear as they danced. "Don't let them see you're afraid." Eleanor's heart raced, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Half of London just walked out." Sebastian's grip on her tightened, his gaze steady and determined. "Good. Those are the ones who don't matter. The ones who stayed are the ones with either courage or sense." The ball continued into the night, but the guests who remained were fewer than expected. The Duke's proclamation and the shocking nature of his choice had split the crowd, but a new tension filled the air, one of curiosity, perhaps even admiration. Sebastian, his arm around Eleanor, raised a glass for a toast. "To my bride-to-be," he said, his voice strong. "A woman of courage, dignity, and grace. Society may question my choice. I do not." Eleanor, her heart heavy with the weight of what was happening, realized that the scandal had only just begun, and their fate had already been sealed. As the night unfolded, a footman approached Sebastian with a letter, and his expression darkened as he read the message. Eleanor's heart sank. "What is it?" she asked softly. Sebastian clenched his jaw. "A message from my solicitors. Lord Pemberton has filed a legal petition to block our marriage, claiming you're mentally incompetent and that I'm under undue influence. He's fighting back." Eleanor's breath caught. "It's beginning." Sebastian's response was cold and resolute. "Let it begin. We'll finish it." The morning after the engagement ball, Ashford House stood in a quiet that was almost unnatural. The echoes of laughter, the faint music, and the murmurs of scandal had all faded, replaced by a tension that hung thick in the air. Eleanor had not slept. She lay in her small servant's room, her body stiff from the weight of what had transpired. The events of the night before the public declaration, the kiss, the scandal played over and over in her mind, but the bright light of day only magnified her uncertainty. She had been thrust into a world she wasn't sure she belonged in, but there was no going back. No matter how much she wished to erase the night and its consequences, she couldn't. The Duke had chosen her. He had made his choice before all of London society, and now they would bear witness to the fallout of that decision. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of voices in the hallway. She sat up, the reality of the situation weighing down on her shoulders as she pulled the covers off her body and slowly dressed in her plain, simple attire. She felt a world apart from the glittering gowns and sparkling jewels she had worn the night before. There was no time to dwell on the enormity of the situation, though. Sebastian was already facing a storm, and Eleanor had a role to play in it. In the Duke's study, the morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the faces of several men gathered around the long oak table. Mr. Blackwood, Sebastian's lead solicitor, sat at the head, his expression grave. Next to him were two investigators, Mr. James Crawford, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s, and another solicitor, Mr. Reynolds. All of them were absorbed in the weight of the legal battle that had already begun. Eleanor entered quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. Her presence was a silent acknowledgement of the tension that filled the room. She barely registered the polite nods of the men as her gaze locked on Sebastian. He was standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames, his jaw set in a hard line. "Miss Thorne." Mr. Blackwood greeted her with a nod. "Please, take a seat. We're just about to discuss Lord Pemberton's strategy." Eleanor moved to a chair near the desk, her eyes flicking between the men. Her pulse quickened as the subject of the conversation became clear. The battle had already begun, and it was only a matter of time before the public would know just how far Lord Pemberton was willing to go to discredit them both. Mr. Blackwood's voice was calm, but Eleanor could hear the undertones of frustration in it. Lord Pemberton's legal petition is straightforward, but insidious. His first attack will be on Miss Thorne's competence to marry. He's already insinuating that her reduced circumstances indicate mental deficiency. Eleanor felt the sting of his words deep in her chest. Reduced circumstances. She, who had spent her life in servitude, trying to bury her pride and her past, was now being painted as incapable, as less than. The weight of that accusation settled on her like a stone in her stomach. Sebastian's fury was palpable. He slammed his fist down on the desk, his voice low but full of barely controlled rage. He's trying to paint Eleanor as either an imbecile or a scheming seductress. Both are lies, lies to cover up his own crimes. "So," Mr. Blackwood nodded grimly, "indeed. The second prong of his strategy is to question your judgment, your grace. He'll claim that you are suffering temporary insanity due to the humiliation of Lady Victoria's elopement. It's a weak argument, but we must be prepared to counter it." Sebastian's gaze never wavered. "Let him try. The truth will come to light no matter how hard he fights it." Mr. Blackwood continued, his voice becoming more pragmatic. "The third and most dangerous attack is the accusation of undue influence. Pemberton will claim that Miss Thorne manipulated you, that she seduced you for your title and fortune. It is the most damaging argument he can make." Sebastian's fists clenched, his eyes flashing with anger. "That's absurd. Eleanor would never—" "I know, Your Grace," Mr. Blackwood interrupted gently. "But we must be ready. We have to prove Eleanor's character, her intelligence, her integrity, in every way possible. We must go on the offensive." Eleanor, though sitting quietly, felt her heart thud painfully in her chest. She couldn't bear the thought of Sebastian being dragged into this mess any longer. She couldn't bear to see him painted as a fool, manipulated by her. She had already given him enough trouble, enough scandal. She had never wanted this, but now it seemed there was no way to stop the tide of it. Sebastian turned to her then, his expression fierce but tender. "Eleanor, I've already been investigating your father's case. I've been gathering evidence of Pemberton's embezzlement for 6 months now." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "What?" Sebastian stepped forward, placing a hand on the back of the chair beside her. "Your father was innocent, Eleanor. I've compiled everything. The financial records, the forged documents, the witness testimonies. It's all here." Eleanor's eyes widened in shock. "You've been investigating my father's case." The weight of his words pressed down on her, and her mind reeled. "But why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I wanted to be sure," Sebastian replied quietly. "I wanted to have the evidence before I confronted him, before I told you." Mr. Crawford, who had been quietly reviewing some papers, spoke up. "We've made progress, Your Grace, but the evidence is still circumstantial. We need more before we can go to trial. We need to prove that Lord Pemberton not only ruined Miss Thorne's family, but that he did so with deliberate malice." Eleanor stood up abruptly, the rush of emotion sweeping over her like a wave. "What can we do? How do we prove it?" Sebastian's face softened. "We'll find the proof. I won't stop until your father's name is cleared." Just as Sebastian was about to speak again, Eleanor's gaze landed on a folder lying open on the desk, papers spilling out in disarray. One of the pages caught her eye, a name she recognized. It was her father's name. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling as she leaned over the papers. "My father kept journals, detailed records of every business transaction he made." Sebastian turned to her, eyes wide with hope. "Where are they?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "They're lost. When he died, everything was seized. The entire estate was sold. I don't know where the journals went. Mr. Crawford, ever the investigator, tapped his pen against his lip thoughtfully. We could trace the sale of your father's estate, Miss Thorne. If we can find those journals. We'll find them, Sebastian declared. I'll hire the best people. We won't stop until we get them. The urgency in his voice pushed Eleanor forward. They had to do this. They had to clear her father's name, and they had to do it together. She couldn't fail him now. The search began almost immediately. Eleanor and Sebastian's determination led them to a London antiquarian bookshop known for buying estate libraries. The shop, Aldrich & Sons, was tucked away in Bloomsbury, a quaint establishment filled with the scent of dust and leather. Sebastian and Eleanor walked through the narrow aisles, their footsteps muted by the thick carpet, as Mr. Crawford questioned the elderly proprietor, Mr. Aldrich, about the sale of her father's estate 5 years ago. Mr. Aldrich was an elderly man with a sharp memory. When he heard the name Thorne, his face tightened in recognition. "Tragic business, that," he murmured. The gentleman seemed quite learned from his library. Eleanor's heart raced as she listened. "Do you remember what happened to his journals?" she asked, her voice tight with hope. "Journals?" Mr. Aldrich rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I recall some of the books. Your father's library was quite extensive, but I do remember something unusual." He paused, then pointed toward a shelf in the far corner. Some of the books were put in a separate pile, not for public sale. I seem to recall a set of leather-bound volumes tucked inside a copy of Plutarch's Lives. They seemed out of place. Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Could those be the ones?" Mr. Aldrich nodded. "I've kept them aside. They're still here, if you wish to have a look." The discovery of the journals sent shockwaves through both Eleanor and Sebastian. There they were, 3 leather-bound journals, their edges worn from age but still legible. As Eleanor flipped through the pages, her father's handwriting filled her with a mixture of grief and relief. He had known. He had documented everything. "These are the records," she whispered. "Everything is here. The dates, the amounts, the transactions." He knew. Her grief surged, but it was tempered by the knowledge that her father had not died a thief. He had been framed, destroyed by a man who had feared the truth. And then, among the journals, Eleanor found something else, a letter from Lady Victoria, never sent. The words she read burned through her like fire. "Father said your presence would remind the Duke daily of the consequences of associating with disgraced families. But I saw how he looked at you, Eleanor. I think Father's plan backfired." Eleanor's stomach turned. Lady Victoria knew. She knew everything. Sebastian's fury was barely contained as he read the letter over Eleanor's shoulder. His voice was low, dangerous. "Pemberton didn't just ruin your father. He tormented you too, and I'll make him pay for it." Eleanor's hand trembled in his, her eyes filled with tears. "Not just for me, for my father, for justice." They shared a moment of fierce resolve. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about exposing the truth, reclaiming the Thorne family's honor, and ensuring that Lord Pemberton paid for his crimes. Later, as Mr. Blackwood reviewed the journals, he gave his final assessment. "This is it. This is everything we need. We can take this before the Crown's bench." Sebastian turned to Eleanor, his eyes filled with determination. "We announce the trial publicly. Let all of London see who the real criminal is." Eleanor's heart pounded. "This will be even more scandalous. A duke accusing a lord, defending his servant bride." Sebastian kissed her forehead, his voice fierce. "You're not my servant. You're my future wife. And I'll burn down all of London society to prove your father's innocence if I must." The journals were spread across the desk, evidence of both destruction and vindication. It was time to take back everything they had lost. The air inside the Crown Court at Old Bailey was thick with anticipation, every inch of the grand courtroom buzzing with the energy of London's elite, who had gathered for the most dramatic spectacle of the season. The gallery, packed with lords and ladies, was a sea of finely dressed figures, their gloved hands clutching opera glasses and fans, their faces a mix of curiosity and barely concealed excitement. For them, this trial was not a matter of justice, it was entertainment, an event that would provide gossip for years to come. The press had arrived in full force, with journalists from every major paper poised to capture every detail. Sketch artists worked furiously at their easels, their pencils flying across paper, capturing the drama of the courtroom. Eleanor could feel the eyes of the room on her as she sat in the witness section, dressed in the modest but well-made dress provided by the dowager. She wore the late Duchess's pearl necklace as her only ornament, and though she had tried to appear composed, the unease in her chest was undeniable. The world outside had turned its gaze toward her, but she had never felt so exposed in her life. Sebastian was seated in the front row, his presence both a source of support and a reminder of everything that was at stake. His gaze occasionally met hers, a silent reassurance that he was standing with her through this nightmare, his strength a pillar on which she leaned. But even his stoic presence could not fully quell the storm of emotions churning within her. The past few weeks had been a blur, moving from one confrontation to the next, from the engagement ball to the gathering of evidence against Lord Pemberton, and now this moment. The trial of the man who had destroyed her father's life, the man whose lies had set everything in motion, was now before the crown, and everything was hanging in the balance. Lord Pemberton sat at the defendant's table, his face flushed with anger, his posture stiff and defensive. His solicitor whispered urgently to him, the tension in the air thickening with each passing second. The bloodshot eyes of the man who had once wielded so much power were now filled with rage and fear, as if he knew the walls were closing in. Sir Edmund Hartley, the Crown's prosecutor, stood at the front of the courtroom, his voice calm and measured as he began to present the evidence. He was a man of sharp intellect, used to handling cases with the gravity of this one. As he spoke, his words rang out clearly, drawing the attention of the entire room. "We begin with the records," he said, holding up one of the journals that had been uncovered in the investigation. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence as the pages were turned for all to see. "This," Sir Edmund continued, "is the personal ledger of Thomas Thorne, a man whose life was destroyed by the actions of the defendant, Lord Pemberton. Over a period of 5 years, Lord Pemberton embezzled more than £50,000 from the Thorne-Pemberton shipping partnership, systematically stealing from his business partner. The defendant sought to cover his tracks by planting evidence that made it appear as if Mr. Thorne had been the thief." A ripple of shock passed through the gallery as the details unfolded. Eleanor sat still, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She had spent years believing her father had been guilty of the crime he had been accused of. The journals, the evidence that Sebastian had gathered, had given her the truth she had longed for. But hearing it now, so publicly, was like an open wound. The pain of her father's disgrace and the injustice he had suffered came rushing back in full force. The defendant's crime was not just one of financial theft. Sir Edmund's voice cut through her thoughts. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to ruin Mr. Thorne's reputation, and when the victim sought to expose the truth, Lord Pemberton struck first, using his power to accuse Mr. Thorne of embezzlement. He ruined the Thorne family's name and destroyed everything they had. The prosecution's case was damning, the evidence irrefutable, but the defense would not go down easily. Lord Pemberton's solicitor rose to his feet, his expression one of practiced calm, though Eleanor could see the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He was a man who had defended the most powerful of clients, and he would not be easily undone by what had been presented so far. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of hostility. "We are told that these journals, these conveniently discovered journals, are the key to this case. But let us consider the timing. The very documents needed to save the Duke from scandal were found, just as His Grace requires them. How convenient." Eleanor's breath hitched as the solicitor turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. "Isn't it possible, Miss Thorne, that these journals were fabricated to suit the needs of the Duke? Perhaps they were conveniently created to legitimize an improbable rise from maid to duchess." Eleanor's heart clenched, but she did not flinch. She had seen this before. This was the tactic of powerful men who refused to let go of their control. "And what of your father, Miss Thorne?" the solicitor continued, his voice cold and dismissive. "Isn't it true that Thomas Thorne was an unreliable businessman, that his suicide was evidence of his guilt? He could not live with the shame of his actions." Eleanor's hands trembled, but she kept her composure, unwilling to let them paint her father in the same light as Lord Pemberton. Her voice, when it came, was low but firm. "My father was an honorable man," she said, the words carrying the weight of years of pain and silence. "He taught me that our word is our bond, that integrity is the only true wealth. When he was accused, he was devastated not by the loss of money, but by the loss of his good name. My father did not steal. Lord Pemberton did." The defense attorney sneered but did not respond. It was clear he had not expected such a direct response from Eleanor. But the damage was done. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and the jury would be forced to weigh the conflicting arguments carefully. Eleanor was called to the stand. It was the moment she had feared, the moment she had been dreading since the trial had begun. She could hear her heart thudding in her ears as she walked toward the witness stand, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to remain steady. The prosecutor, Sir Edmund, was kind in his questioning, guiding her through the painful memories with a gentle touch. "Miss Thorne, can you tell the court about your father's character?" he asked, his voice soothing yet firm. Eleanor nodded, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "My father was the most honest man I ever knew. He believed in hard work, in loyalty, in honor. He was a man of principles, and he taught me to live by those principles no matter the cost." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. When he was accused of stealing from his partner, he was devastated, not because of the loss of money, but because he couldn't prove that he was innocent. It shattered him. I saw it in his eyes. And when he died believing the world thought him guilty. Her voice caught in her throat as she continued. The estate was sold off. Everything was taken. The journals, his records, everything was gone. Her hands gripped the stand as she fought to keep herself together. The pain of losing her father, of seeing his name destroyed, flooded her heart. "I never had the chance to save anything," she whispered. "Not even his books. But then I found the journals. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately." The courtroom fell silent. The evidence was clear, and the truth was beginning to settle in the room. The defense's cross-examination was brutal. The solicitor, with his sharp words and quick tongue, sought to tear Eleanor down, to paint her as nothing more than a fortune hunter. "Isn't it true, Miss Thorne, that your rise from maid to duchess is a direct result of your manipulation of the Duke?" the solicitor demanded. Eleanor's hands shook, but she remained poised. "No," she replied, her voice steady despite the anger rising within her. "I loved my father. I loved him so much that when he died, I wanted to die too. I was 17 years old, and I lost everything. My father, my home, my name, my future. I survived by becoming invisible, by serving others, by accepting that I would never have the life I was born to." She took a shaky breath, meeting the solicitor's gaze with newfound strength. "And yes, I fell in love with the Duke. How could I not? He's kind and honorable, and he saw me when no one else did. But I never schemed, never seduced, never manipulated. I'm here today not to secure my marriage, but to restore my father's honor. That's all I've ever wanted." There was a pause, a long, pregnant silence in the courtroom. Even the most skeptical of the jury seemed to shift in their seats, some with expressions of disbelief, others with admiration. The verdict. The trial continued into the afternoon, with more testimony and cross-examination, but Eleanor's words had already begun to shift the balance. As the jury deliberated, Sebastian sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. His eyes were filled with pride and determination. 3 hours later, the jury returned. "Guilty," the foreman announced, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom, "on all counts of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy." The courtroom erupted in shock and disbelief. Lord Pemberton's face turned pale, his arrogant facade cracking as he was led away in handcuffs. Eleanor's heart raced, but it was not fear, she felt it was vindication. Her father's name had been restored. As the scene unfolded, Eleanor felt Sebastian's arms around her, pulling her close. "It's over," he whispered. "You're free. Your father's name is restored." Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes as she nodded. "He'll never know. He died believing himself disgraced." The dowager approached, her hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "But you know, and now all of London knows. Thomas Thorne was an honorable man destroyed by corruption. That truth will live forever." The crowd of supporters began to gather around them. Those who had stayed loyal, those who had walked out during the engagement ball now returned to offer congratulations. But in the midst of the celebration, Eleanor knew there would always be those who would whisper, those who would doubt. The war for their social acceptance had just begun. As Eleanor and Sebastian stepped outside the courtroom, a messenger arrived with an urgent letter, the seal bearing an unfamiliar coat of arms. The future had just begun, and Eleanor, for the first time, felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders, a weight she would carry with pride. The letter arrived early, a faint whisper of urgency in its delivery. It was from St. Mary's Orphanage in Cornwall, a place Eleanor had never known but now had to face. As the sun began to break over Ashford House, casting a warm glow through the ornate windows of the Duke's private study, the contents of that letter shook Eleanor to her very core. The letter was simple, yet its contents were staggering. Sister Catherine, matron of St. Mary's Orphanage, writes, "We have in our care a boy named Thomas Thorne, aged 10 years. He was admitted 5 years ago after being found wandering near Plymouth docks. He has been well cared for, though we have only recently learned of his connection to you. We have reason to believe that you are the sister he has spoken of for years. Please, contact us as soon as possible." The words blurred on the page as Eleanor's hands trembled, her breath catching in her chest. Thomas, her brother, her little brother, the one she had been told, had died shortly after their father's tragic fall. Her mind reeled. Thomas was supposed to be dead. She had held on to that grief for years, the loss of her father and the loss of her brother in the same cruel breath. She had been a child, helpless, alone. Her father had died, his reputation destroyed, and with him all that she had known and loved. But this letter shattered everything. Thomas had survived. He had lived all these years, waiting for her. Eleanor's fingers shook as she clutched the letter to her chest, her heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Sebastian, who had been standing near the fireplace, his gaze fixed on the morning sun streaming through the window, turned to face her at the sound of her sharp intake of breath. His eyes softened as he saw the letter in her hands. He crossed the room in quick strides, taking the letter gently from her grasp. "Thomas?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with a quiet wonder. Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. "My brother. He's alive. They say he's been at an orphanage in Cornwall, waiting for me." Sebastian's expression changed, an immediate shift from curiosity to determination. "Then we must go to him. Immediately." The journey to Cornwall was an anxious blur of anticipation and dread. Sebastian had immediately arranged for a private coach, and the Dowager Duchess insisted on accompanying them, her presence both comforting and formidable. She sat across from Eleanor in the carriage, her sharp eyes filled with an expression Eleanor could not decipher. As the carriage rolled through the countryside, Eleanor stared out the window, her thoughts consumed by the little boy she had lost, her brother, the last piece of her family. The night before had been filled with declarations of love, of promises made, but this was different. This was something that belonged to no one but her, something she had not expected to find, something she had not dared hope for. Memories of Thomas flooded her mind, the sound of his small voice calling her name when they had been children, the way he had clung to her when their world fell apart. "Don't leave me, Ellie," he had said. Those words haunted her. She had never meant to leave him, never meant to abandon him, but the cruel fate of their family had separated them. Sebastian, ever perceptive to her moods, reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll find him, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft yet firm. "We'll bring him home." Eleanor gave a weak smile, nodding, though the fear of what she might find gnawed at her insides. What would Thomas be like now? Had he suffered all these years? She couldn't even begin to imagine the life he had led, the pain he must have endured. She clung to the hope that he had survived, that he had waited for her, just as she had always waited for him. The journey took longer than expected, and as they neared the orphanage, Eleanor could feel the tension building within her. The building was a stark stone structure overlooking the sea, cold and imposing. Its windows were small, and the children pressed their faces against them as the carriage approached, their eager eyes curious about the visitors. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped down from the carriage, her legs unsteady. The Dowager followed closely behind, her presence a silent anchor in the sea of uncertainty Eleanor felt. Sister Catherine, the matron of the orphanage, greeted them at the door, her face kind but lined with concern. "Miss Thorne," she said gently, "we've kept him safe all these years. He's been waiting for you. He remembers you." Eleanor's throat closed as she nodded, unable to speak. She followed Sister Catherine through the dim, narrow halls, her feet heavy with anticipation. At the end of the hall, in a small, sparse dormitory, a boy sat on a narrow bed, a battered book in his hands. His hair was dark, unruly, and his small frame seemed even thinner than she remembered. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "Thomas?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. The recognition was instantaneous. His face, so familiar yet older now, looked up at her with a mix of hope and fear. "Ellie," he asked in a trembling voice, "is it really you?" Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as she rushed toward him. The moment their arms wrapped around each other, everything else faded away. The years of separation, the grief, the sorrow, all of it seemed to vanish in that single moment. "I knew you'd come," Thomas whispered, his small hands clutching her as if afraid she might disappear. "I knew you didn't forget me. I told them you'd come." Eleanor's chest tightened. She hadn't known what to expect, but hearing his voice, seeing him again, was more than she could bear. She had failed him. She had believed he was dead, but he had been waiting for her all along. As they sat together on the narrow bed, Thomas's voice trembled as he recounted the years of separation. "After Father died, they took me away," he said quietly, his eyes darkening with the memory. "They told me you were dead, Ellie. They said I was alone. They put me in a workhouse in London. But then, a kind gentleman came." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "A kind gentleman?" "Yes, he promised he would take me to you, that you would be waiting for me." Thomas's eyes clouded with confusion. "But instead, they brought me here. They told me you had died too. I didn't know what to think." Eleanor's heart ached as she listened to him. The cruel twists of fate that had kept them apart seemed endless. "The payments stopped 3 years ago," Thomas continued, his voice soft. "After that, I didn't know what would happen to me. But Sister Catherine kept me here. She taught me how to read and write, so I wouldn't be like the others who couldn't." The relief in Eleanor's heart was bittersweet. "You survived, Thomas. You're here. You're alive." She reached out to touch his cheek, her fingers trembling. Sebastian, who had been quietly listening, turned to Sister Catherine with a questioning look. "Who placed him here? Who paid for his care all these years?" Sister Catherine hesitated, as if unsure whether to reveal what she knew. "The payments came from a solicitor in London," she said. "Marsh and Associates." The client remained anonymous, but the instructions were clear: keep him safe and hidden. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest. Who would do this? Sebastian's brow furrowed. The timing. It stopped exactly when Eleanor entered service at Ashford House. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as the implications hit her. "Pemberton," she whispered. "Lord Pemberton knew he was alive. He used him as leverage." Sebastian's voice was hard, a dangerous edge to his tone. If Eleanor ever threatened to expose the truth about her father, Pemberton could use Thomas against her. When Eleanor became a servant, he no longer had any use for the boy. Eleanor's fists clenched, her face pale with fury. He took everything, everything, and he would have let Thomas rot in that orphanage forever. The truth of Thomas's survival, and the twisted cruelty behind his placement, was a revelation that could not be ignored. But it was not just a matter of personal grief, it was a matter of justice. "Sebastian," Eleanor said, her voice steady with determination, "we need to restore my father's name. We need to take him down." Sebastian nodded, his jaw clenched. "And we will. Everything will be restored. The estate, the properties, the title. You are legally restored as the daughter of a baronet, Eleanor. Thomas will inherit his father's title when he comes of age." Eleanor could hardly believe the words. After all the years of pain, the lies, the lost family, she was finally being given the chance to reclaim everything that had been stolen from her. As the realization settled in, Sebastian turned to Thomas. "You don't have to stay in the orphanage anymore. You can come live with us. You'll receive the education you deserve. Be prepared to take on your role as the baronet." The dowager, who had been listening with quiet pride, added, "Your family now, Thomas. Eleanor is to be my grandson's wife, which makes you my great-nephew by marriage." Thomas hesitated, looking between Eleanor and Sebastian, his young face filled with uncertainty. "Will I be a burden?" he asked quietly. "Another scandal for you to bear?" Eleanor pulled him into a fierce embrace. "You're my brother, my only family. You could never be a burden." Sebastian knelt down to Thomas's level, his voice soft but firm. "Your sister saved me, Thomas. She gave me the courage to choose love over duty. Let me return the favor by giving you both the family you deserve." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "I used to imagine this," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Being found, being wanted again. I stopped letting myself dream it because it hurt too much." As they made their way back to London, Thomas sat between Eleanor and the dowager, his eyes wide with wonder as he marveled at the luxury of their private coach. He asked 100 questions, each one more innocent than the last. "What happened after Papa died, Ellie? Why didn't you come for me?" Eleanor smiled softly, her heart heavy with the truth of the years they had lost. She told him what she could, leaving out the worst details. But speaking of her time at Ashford House, the loneliness, and the secret hope that had never died, Thomas nodded solemnly, understanding more than his years would suggest. "I remember what Papa said to me before he died," he said quietly. "Be brave, Thomas. The truth always comes to light, even if it takes years. Be patient and be brave." Sebastian, who had been listening intently, nodded thoughtfully. "Your father was a wise man, and he was right." As they approached Ashford House, the weight of the future seemed to settle around them. The family they had once thought lost was now whole again. And despite the scandal, despite the uncertainty that still loomed, Eleanor knew one thing for certain: they would face it together. When they arrived, the staff of Ashford House was gathered in the grand entrance hall, waiting for the Thorne siblings to arrive. Mrs. Davies, her eyes glistening with tears, was the first to greet them, her arms outstretched in welcome. Thomas's wide-eyed amazement as he stepped inside the grand estate was impossible to miss. Is this real, Ellie?" Eleanor smiled through her tears. "Yes, darling, this is real. We're safe now. We're together, and we're going home." As she watched her brother's joy, her heart swelled with a mixture of relief and anticipation. Sebastian stood in the doorway, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He had given her a family, and in return, she had given him her love. And so, a new chapter began for them all. The morning of Eleanor's wedding arrived with the soft, golden light of dawn spilling through the windows of Ashford House. The air was crisp and still, as if the entire world had paused to watch the unfolding spectacle. A sense of anticipation hung in the grand halls, where servants hurried with final preparations, and the staff bustled with nervous excitement. Today was the day that would change everything. Inside the Dowager Duchess's private chambers, Eleanor stood before a full-length mirror, the heavy silence broken only by the gentle rustle of silk, as Marie, the Dowager's maid, worked meticulously on her hair. The room was dimly lit by soft candles, their flames flickering against the ancient tapestries hanging on the walls, their colors faded by time but still regal in their elegance. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The gown was exquisite. It was ivory silk, with a delicate lace overlay that shimmered softly, like the lightest mist at dawn. The late Duchess's wedding gown, now altered to fit Eleanor's slighter frame, was transformed into something new, a symbol of her own transformation, from a maid to the future Duchess of Ashford. Marie's hands were gentle but precise as she swept Eleanor's hair up, pinning it with pearl pins that gleamed softly in the dim light. The tendrils of hair that framed Eleanor's face were left loose, curling softly, creating an ethereal, timeless look. And then, the final touch, the veil. The antique Bruges lace, a family heirloom that had passed from generation to generation, was draped over her head like a cloud of history, linking her to the women who had worn it before her. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached up to touch the lace, the weight of the moment settling on her. Her transformation was surreal. The quiet, humble servant she had once been seemed so distant now, a mere shadow in the face of what was happening. The Dowager, standing by the window, watched her with a mixture of pride and melancholy. She spoke quietly, her voice tinged with emotion. "My daughter-in-law wore this gown," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Now you do. You honor her memory." Eleanor's heart tightened, her gaze falling to the floor as she absorbed the weight of the words. She had never imagined such a moment, and yet here she was, standing on the precipice of everything she had once thought impossible. Her father's memory, her mother's absence, the pain of her fall from grace, all of it seemed to blur in this moment of intense change. "I never thought I would be here," Eleanor whispered, her voice soft with awe. "You're here, Eleanor," the Dowager replied, her tone firm, yet filled with affection. "And you're exactly where you're meant to be." Eleanor stood alone for a moment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman before her, the gown, the jewels, the air of nobility that surrounded her. It all felt so foreign, so strange, and yet so right. From Sir Thomas Thorne's daughter to destitute orphan, from servant to bride. She had come so far, but the road had not been easy. It had been marked by loss, by scandal, and by the enduring weight of her family's disgrace. But it had also been marked by love, love that had been given freely, love that had been fought for, and love that had restored everything she had once thought lost. Eleanor's hand drifted to the locket she wore beneath her gown, a small, delicate piece of jewelry that held the portrait of her mother. Her mother, Charity Ashworth, who had once been a lady of high society before the world turned its back on her. Her father's death, his wrongful disgrace, had shattered her world. But now, as she stood in this room, on the threshold of her new life, Eleanor knew her father would have been proud. He would have loved Sebastian, the man who had shown her that love could heal even the deepest wounds. But as she stood there, staring at her reflection, there was a pang of regret, of sadness. She wished her father could see her now. She wished he could know the truth that his daughter had been restored, that the name Thorn had been cleared, and that love had won. The soft sound of the door opening brought her out of her reverie. A small voice broke through her thoughts. "Ellie, you look like a princess." Eleanor turned, her heart swelling at the sight of her young brother Thomas, standing in the doorway. He was dressed in his new page's outfit, a small but growing figure of dignity and pride. His face was serious for a moment, before breaking into a grin. Eleanor laughed, her heart lightening at the sight of him. "Not quite, darling." "A duchess," she replied, her voice soft with affection. Thomas's face grew more serious as he stepped forward, his eyes searching hers. "Are you happy? Really happy?" Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't been asked this question before, not by Sebastian, not by anyone. She had buried her fears, buried her uncertainties in the whirlwind of the past few weeks. But now, with Thomas looking at her so intently, she had no choice but to face the truth. "Terrified," she whispered, "but yes, gloriously happy." Thomas smiled softly, his youthful understanding of the world perhaps more profound than he realized. "Then I'm happy for you, Ellie. I knew it would be all right." The chapel was an intimate, private space, far removed from the grand celebrations that society would expect for such an occasion. It was the family chapel, the place where Sebastian had once prayed for his family, and now it would be the place where he would marry Eleanor. The air inside was cool, the ancient stone walls holding the weight of centuries of Sinclair history. The light from the stained glass windows filtered through, casting colorful patterns on the stone floors, a reminder that even in darkness there could be beauty. The guests were few: the Dowager Duchess, Thomas, Mrs. Davies, and a handful of close friends and family. Among them was Lord Hartwell, a quiet supporter of Sebastian's choice, and surprisingly, Lady Charlotte Waverley, who had been one of the few who had stayed at the ball despite the scandal. Most of society had turned its back on them, and yet this was the wedding that mattered, the one that would mark the beginning of a new life for Eleanor, one filled with love, acceptance, and a future of her own making. Eleanor stood at the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. She was alone, for there was no father to give her away. Her eyes flickered to Thomas, standing near the altar, his small face serious as he waited. When the vicar asked, "Who gives this woman?" there was no hesitation in Thomas's voice as he stepped forward. "I do," he said clearly, his young voice carrying with dignity, "her brother and her family." Eleanor felt the rush of emotion at his words and the quiet approval of the guests who had remained. It was a moment of pure, unspoken unity. Even those who had once scorned her now saw the strength in her family. Sebastian stood at the altar, his face soft with admiration as he watched her. His expression revealed everything: his love, his pride, his joy. It was a look that made Eleanor's heart swell with emotion. As the vows were exchanged, their words took on a deeper meaning, made profound by the circumstances they had overcome. "I, Sebastian Sinclair, take thee, Eleanor Thorn, to be my wedded wife." Sebastian's voice rang out clear and steady. "I, Eleanor Thorn, take thee, Sebastian Sinclair, to be my wedded husband," Eleanor replied, her hands shaking slightly, but her voice firm and true. The rings were exchanged, simple gold bands engraved with intertwined initials, and as the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause, not the stifled applause of the aristocracy, but the genuine warmth of those who had witnessed the transformation of a woman from a servant to a duchess, a daughter to a sister, a lost soul to a beloved wife. Sebastian took Eleanor's face in his hands, his voice barely a whisper. "My duchess, my love, my equal in all things. Their kiss was tender, reverent, a promise sealed before God and witnesses. It was a kiss of vindication, of love finally spoken aloud, of a future that had once seemed impossible, now unfolding before them. As they pulled away, Thomas cheered, breaking the tension in the room and making everyone laugh. The dowager wiped a tear from her eye, a silent testament to her pride in her grandson. The small wedding breakfast was held in Ashford House's dining room, the atmosphere quiet but filled with warmth. There were toasts made by Lord Hartwell, praising Sebastian's courage in following his heart. Lady Charlotte Waverley, ever the rebel, made her toast with a wry smile. To the couple who proved love is more powerful than propriety. The dowager's speech was more emotional. True nobility is measured by character, not title. And you, my dear, have shown me that. Thomas's toast was simple. To my sister who never gave up on me, and to my new brother who gave us both hope. Even Mrs. Davies, who had quietly supported Eleanor throughout, made a quiet speech. We always knew Miss Eleanor, your grace, was special. We're honored to serve you. After the wedding, the reality of their social position loomed. A footman discreetly entered with the morning papers. Sebastian took them, his eyes scanning the headlines. Duke weds disgraced servant in shocking ceremony. One headline read, Ashford's folly, noble house fallen. Another. Eleanor felt the sting of the words, the attacks on her character, but she didn't let them break her. Sebastian's fury was palpable as he crumpled the papers. Lies and envy, all of it. Eleanor placed her hand over his. Let them write what they will. We know the truth. As they prepared for their honeymoon, leaving for a month in the Lake District, Thomas stood at the doorway, his face a mixture of happiness and sadness. 2 weeks, darling, then we'll send for you, Eleanor promised, pulling him into an embrace. Sebastian added with a grin, I'll teach you to fish and ride properly. A future baronet needs these skills. The farewell was simple but heartfelt. The bouquet was thrown, and a shower of rice followed them as they left for their new life. Inside the carriage, Sebastian and Eleanor were alone for the first time as husband and wife. The city streets gave way to the countryside, the noise of London fading behind them. Sebastian held her close. You can rest now. We won. We're together. Nothing else matters, Eleanor whispered, her voice full of wonder. Do you have any regrets? Now that it's done, do you regret choosing me? Sebastian's response was fierce. My only regret is every day I wasted not claiming you as mine. Every moment before this was a waste. Their kiss deepened, the passion that had been restrained by propriety now finally unleashed, and as the carriage disappeared into the countryside, Eleanor knew that the rest of their lives had just begun. Ashford Chapel, with its ancient stone walls and stained glass windows, stood as a timeless witness to the love story that had unfolded within its sacred space. The sun had dipped low in the autumn sky, casting a soft golden hue through the windows, turning the chapel's interior into a sea of warm colors. Today, the chapel would bear witness to another pivotal moment, an event that marked the culmination of a year filled with love, restoration, and a newfound sense of belonging. The christening of Victoria Eleanor Sinclair. The chapel, once a place of whispered judgments, now echoed with the hum of approval, the quiet reverence of a family and friends who had come together to witness a joy long anticipated. The same grand structure where Sebastian and Eleanor had married amidst the scandal of the season was now filled with a different crowd, one that had shed its initial doubts and instead embraced the union they had once condemned. Society had returned to Ashford House, but not in the same way. The scandal that had once marred Sebastian and Eleanor's love was now a fading memory, replaced by new gossip, new stories to tell. Eleanor's transformation from a maid to a duchess had once been the fodder of cruel whispers. Now, it was celebrated, admired. In the pews, familiar faces filled the rows. Lord and Lady Hartwell, steadfast supporters of Sebastian and Eleanor, sat proudly beside Lady Charlotte Waverley, who had, in her usual defiant manner, returned to show her support. The dowager sat at the front, her eyes gleaming with affection, a proud grandmother watching her granddaughter-in-law and great-granddaughter. There were others too, those who had once walked out in protest, now returning to join the celebration. They had come not because of titles or status, but because of the family that had been built here, in this chapel. The transformation from scandal to romance had been complete. Eleanor stood at the altar, her arms cradling her infant daughter, Victoria Eleanor Sinclair. The child squirmed slightly in her arms, her soft cries filling the space, but Eleanor's heart swelled with love for the little girl she had waited so long to hold. The years of hardship, the days of grief, had all led to this moment, the moment when the love she had found with Sebastian had brought her full circle. From a lady's maid in a household that was not her own, to a mother holding her daughter in the same chapel where she had once been married in secret, Eleanor had become someone different. The transformation wasn't just in her appearance, though the emerald green silk gown, the Ashford diamonds around her neck, and her poise as a duchess were unmistakable. It was in her heart, her confidence, and her sense of purpose. She had become not just the Duchess of Ashford, but a woman who knew her own strength and worth. Her transformation had come at a cost: scandal, censure, battles fought and won, but the gain had been immeasurable. Love, family, and a future she had never dared to dream of. She looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, feeling the weight of her mother's locket beneath her gown, a small, constant reminder of her origins, her mother's love, and the journey that had brought her to this place. As the guests watched, a hush fell over the chapel. The vicar began to speak, his words a soft murmur of grace and redemption. But Eleanor's thoughts drifted back to the past, to her father's untimely death, to the long years of servitude. She wished he could see her now. He would have loved Sebastian, and he would have been proud of her, the daughter who had survived the deepest depths of disgrace to find herself here. Suddenly, she felt a small hand slip into hers. It was Thomas, now 12, dressed in his finest formal attire, standing by her side as one of Victoria's godfathers. The boy who had once been lost, now thriving, accepted by society, and loved unconditionally by her and Sebastian. "Are you happy, Ellie?" Thomas asked, his voice soft with sincerity. Eleanor smiled warmly at him. "More than I ever dreamed possible, darling. Sometimes I wake up afraid that this is all a beautiful dream." Thomas nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Well, it's not a dream, is it?" He looked down at the baby in her arms and then at her face. "It's real. You and Sebastian are happy, and that makes me happy." The baptism was a simple, intimate affair, with only the closest of family and friends present. The ancient chapel, where centuries of Sinclairs had worshipped and celebrated, now held an atmosphere of peace. The child's name, Victoria Eleanor, was whispered in reverence by the vicar, and as he placed the water upon the child's brow, a collective sigh of contentment passed through the room. Victoria's name was a tribute to the lady whose departure had led to Sebastian's awakening and a reflection of Eleanor's own strength. Sebastian stood beside Eleanor, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. His eyes were soft as he gazed at their daughter, his pride and joy evident. His silent prayer was one of gratitude, not just for their daughter's health, but for the life they had built together, a life so different from what he had ever imagined. The ceremony was filled with quiet joy, but there were moments when the solemnity of the past few years crept into Eleanor's thoughts. Her mother, Charity, would never see this day, nor would her father. The reception at Ashford House was held in the ballroom, the same room where their engagement had once been announced, to gasps of shock and outrage. The ballroom, however, now held a different energy. The guests were here not out of obligation, but because they had accepted the truth of the union between Sebastian and Eleanor. Lady Pemberton, Victoria's mother, was conspicuously absent. She had been relegated to a small pension after her disgrace, her husband imprisoned for his role in the schemes that had destroyed Thomas Thorne's life. The irony was palpable. Victoria, who had once thought herself superior, had fled with her cavalry captain husband to India, far away from the wreckage of her family's reputation. Victoria's letter had arrived weeks ago, a note of apology of sorts. She had congratulated Eleanor and Sebastian for their happiness, though the words were thinly veiled with regret. "I'm happy in my choice," she wrote. "I'm glad you found happiness in yours. Perhaps we were all meant to end up exactly where we are." Eleanor smiled faintly, the bitterness of the past dissolving as she held her daughter in her arms. She had nothing to prove to Victoria, nothing to regret. Her journey had led her here, and that was enough. As the evening wore on, society matrons approached Eleanor, eager to befriend her now. The very women who had once whispered behind her back were now smiling in her presence, their words full of forced warmth. Eleanor accepted their overtures with grace, knowing that their approval was as fickle as the wind. A young lady, uncertain and eager, approached Eleanor with curiosity. Your Grace, how did you endure the scandal? I'm facing my own difficulties. Eleanor smiled softly, her voice gentle but firm. With dignity, faith, and the support of those who truly love you, society's judgment is temporary, your integrity is permanent. Her words rang out, not as a boast but as a quiet declaration. Eleanor had learned the hard way that the world's judgment held no weight against the strength of one's character. Sebastian watched from across the room, his gaze never leaving Eleanor. The love he had once kept hidden was now free, evident in every glance, every touch. You were right to fight for her, Lord Hartwell remarked, his voice warm with admiration as he observed Sebastian watching Eleanor. Look at her. She's magnificent. Sebastian's response was simple but filled with conviction. She always was. Society just couldn't see it through their prejudice. 7. His heart swelled with pride. The battles they had fought, the enemies they had made, had all been worth it. His amazement was palpable. He had almost let fear and duty rob him of this happiness. The Dowager Duchess stood with Victoria in her arms, her smile radiant. She had been a quiet force in their journey, a guiding hand that had not faltered when society sought to tear them apart. You've honored her memory, the Dowager said to Eleanor, her voice thick with emotion. You've restored your father's name, and you've built a family rooted in love. Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat as she turned to the Dowager. I wish she could have seen this, Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Dowager took Eleanor's hand, her eyes soft with understanding. I was afraid, you know, when Sebastian first told me he wanted to marry you, not because of who you were, but because of what society would do to you both. Eleanor nodded, her heart full. But you didn't fail me. You supported us. The Dowager's smile was tinged with both pride and nostalgia. You were stronger than my fears. And now look what you've built. As the evening wore on and guests slowly trickled out, Eleanor found herself alone in the nursery, Sebastian by her side. Their daughter, Victoria, slept peacefully in her cradle, her tiny breaths filling the room with a sense of peace they had long sought. Sebastian wrapped his arms around Eleanor, his voice soft. Happy, my love. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him. More than I ever dreamed possible. Sometimes I wake up afraid this is all a beautiful dream. Eleanor. Sebastian pressed a kiss to her forehead, his words reassuring. It's real. You're the Duchess of Ashford, mother of my child, love of my life. This is our reality. Eleanor's heart swelled with love, and she allowed herself to lean into him, the weight of the past lifting with each breath she took. As they looked out over the London skyline, with the city now a silent witness to their love, Eleanor felt the finality of their journey. The world that had once rejected them now accepted them. Together, she whispered, feeling the strength of Sebastian's arm around her. Thank you so much for watching this journey unfold. If you enjoyed the story of Eleanor and Sebastian, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more captivating tales. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of their journey resonated with you the most? And if you're craving more stories filled with love, drama, and unexpected twists, hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep believing in love's power to overcome any obstacle. See you soon.